Greetings, adventurers, and welcome to another Candleside chat. I believe this is the third one that I am doing at this point. If this is your first time joining me for one of these chats, they can tend to go a little long, and they can be a little rambly, but that's just the way that I am sometimes. So I hope that it is interesting to you and informative, as I hope all my videos are, really. See, I'm rambling already. So the concept for this video started out as just a straight historical correction, and it has turned into a much more in-depth conversation with a lot more questions than are even necessary, to be completely honest. But I really hope that you watch through the whole thing, because I want to hear your opinions on how historical accuracy influences media at the end of my portion of this conversation. So first, this is the first historical correction that I'm doing here on the channel, and it certainly won't be the last. And I'm very glad for the people that pointed this out to me in my previous video about medieval camp setups. I made the erroneous statement that these Viking stargazer chairs, as I will refer to them now, are actually from the Viking time period or medieval. And as it turns out, they are not. So just upon glancing at them, they appear rustic. They look like they could have been built within the time period that we're talking about with the tools that they had available to them. And I've seen them called Viking chairs by a number of woodworking channels, so I just assumed that they actually were. It was an educated assumption, but an assumption nonetheless, and an incorrect one at that. So that is completely my bad, and I am glad to have been corrected. So I know that I walk a fine line on this channel currently between wanting to know what was historically accurate, wanting to do what was historically accurate sometimes, and then other times wanting to be purposefully anachronistic. And the key word there for me is purposefully. The same way many are taught various other art forms, you need to know what the rules are first before you can choose to break them. Otherwise, you're just making a mistake, as I did in this case. So it's very important to me to know what was done actually, in order to then decide what I would like to do within my own fantasy adventuring scenarios in my mind. So I have to be very diligent with things like this in the future, because I don't want my channel to become a source of misinformation, even though it's anachronistic. And misinformation is a very loaded term now, and occasionally it can actually mean correct information that is just inconveniently timed for the people that are gatekeeping information. So, but this was in fact incorrect as it appears to me now. So I had to do a fair amount of digging after I read those comments to be sure of what it was that I was talking about this time. You know, as they say, trust but verify. But as it appears to be, chairs of this design, again, are not historically accurate to the Viking or medieval periods. They appear to be more of a 19th century introduction from Africa. They appear in Boy Scouts manuals, but they do not appear to be European, let alone medieval. So I have a number of articles that I found linked down below for your learning and reading pleasure, but it wasn't any one of those articles or any one comment that convinced me that I had made a mistake. Allow me to explain. So if I just searched for Viking chairs on the internet, I got pictures of these, which is not to say that they are Viking chairs. That is only to say that in this day and age, that is what these are called. Erroneously, apparently. So I had to purposefully search for stargazer chairs are not Viking or something like that in order to find the articles that I listed below, which isn't generally a fantastic sign because you can't argue a negative. So the fact that I had to search for a negative in order to find these articles was strange to me to begin with, and then I read them and now I'm convinced. So the one article that was most damning, linked down below, is the Anglo-Scandinavian Chronicles article. And it actually does fall a little bit into the sort of gatekeeping trap I find, but we'll get to that in a second. It is not a primary source. It has some other non-primary sources listed that have primary sources as sources. So it's a little far removed. It's more of an opinion piece. It's a little biting, if I'm completely honest. But its information is correct, so there's not much to complain about aside from the tone. But it was actually looking through all of the archaeological finds and the historical iconography, and then going through my own memory of what it is that I have seen, you know, in my time studying abroad in Europe, and I went to Viking museums and stuff like that, and I realized I have never seen stargazer chairs like this represented in any historical iconography before. That's not to say that it doesn't exist. I just haven't seen it. And apparently they haven't ever been excavated either. So that is what really convinced me that I was incorrect in calling these Viking chairs. Now, absence of evidence isn't necessarily evidence of absence, but in this case, there is not evidence that these existed in the Viking period, and there is evidence of other chairs existing in the Viking period, and they don't look anything like this. They're in fact much more sophisticated. And we'll talk about those in a second, but I just want to go over my gatekeeping comment earlier. Now, I might be new to YouTube as a creator, but I am not new to the internet, and I wasn't born yesterday. So this is not to say that my feelings are hurt by comments or that I'm trying to cover up for being wrong or something like that. I was wrong, and I readily admit that. So I'm also not naming names or posting specific comments or anything like that because, one, I don't want to make people targets, and I also don't know for a fact that I am interpreting what is written in the way that it is intended. But I think eventually a comment will come along like this anyway, or an article will come along like this anyway. So this is just a good time to talk about this. So I am genuinely happy that we have a community that is so knowledgeable and that I can learn when I am incorrect in the comments. So also don't take this as me telling people no longer to correct me. That would make me really sad. I want to continue to learn. I'm very glad that I now know that these are not Viking chairs. So there is something to be said for how you go about teaching someone new information in a way that is conducive to having this new party accept your point of view without being untoward. And this is something that I'm sure many of us have experienced at one point or another, when a person might dogmatically adhere to a certain source that they are partial to, or say something like, this was never done, or you would never do this, or you're an idiot, you know, something like that. There are sources, right? And there is evidence, and there is non-evidence, and there is absence of evidence. But if there's anything that I've learned, it's that we're talking about a period in history that was about 1,000 years ago. So if anyone comes to you, or me, or in general, and just says that something never happened or something was always this way, generally I'm gonna say, you're probably wrong, and that someone did it differently. That's just sort of the way it is. So to say something like any real medieval enthusiast knows this, or any real medieval aficionado or expert would know this. And for the record, I don't claim to be an expert anyway, but to say something like that is a very odd way of convincing someone who you have a common interest with that they can learn something new from you. Like how does that work? Like, was I not a medieval enthusiast before I knew this fact that you knew? Can I now be a medieval enthusiast even though there are potentially other things that I don't know? Can I never be a medieval enthusiast because I didn't know something before you told it to me? It's just a very competitive way of sharing information. So that being said, I'm also not the thought police, and at least in America, we theoretically have freedom of speech. So, you know, do whatever you want. I'm not gonna delete those comments if they arise. I'm also not going to debate people in the comments, for the record, but say whatever information however you want. You know, especially if you're right, which in this case, people were. And in these cases, people were very respectful about it. This is sort of just talking generally. I think it bears mentioning that because most of the audience members at the moment for this channel are people who have never LARPed before, people that haven't done reenactment, historical or fantasy, it doesn't really matter, or just want to enjoy Renaissance fairs or hikes while they're in garb. People that have been watching movies and watching YouTubers for years and now want to start dipping their own toes into the water. People that are more knowledgeable, that know cool facts like the origins of this chair, not being Viking, have the unique opportunity to share that information with newer people without making them feel like they're less than you because they're at a different point in their journey than you are. But enough about that. Let's talk about some actual historical chairs. While this wasn't meant to be a historical deep dive into medieval chairs, because the point of this video is that I actually don't know enough about that subject yet personally to feel confident in talking about it, I have put, where I could find them, the archaeological find names along with the pictures of the chairs associated with those finds, so hopefully it's easier for you to do your own research. So while researching how incorrect I was, and then wanting to know what would be correct, I came across a topic that is very interesting. Interesting is a non-word, but so canvas, cloth, chairs and stools appear to be the historically accurate thing, along with box chairs like this. So think Shadiversity's throne, that's correct. Now, I have director's chairs, and those seem pretty comparable. And so they're apparently more closely related to what historically would have been used in around the 11th century than these plank chairs were. And if you just switch out some of the materials, director's chairs are very similar to modern camp chairs. So from a certain point of view, these share more in common ancestrally with Viking chairs than Viking chairs do. As far as I could tell for these folding style chairs, the ones that have cloth seats generally don't have backings. I did find one reproduction that looks like it has a backing, but I can't be sure what this is based off of because I don't know what their source was. The ones that do have backings appear to be entirely made out of wood. So when I say that modern director's chairs are more correct than a Stargazer chair, they're still not correct as far as I can tell. They are just closer to being correct, as they resemble what was around in the time period far more than Stargazer chairs do. But that raises an interesting query, because it's really easy to buy that these are historical chairs, but these might look modern to some of you because they have direct modern equivalents. So as an actor who's done stage and film and fairs now, when it comes to building an atmosphere and showing people that they're in a different setting, when you're conveying time period, when playing to a modern audience that's going to view things through a modern lens, this might look incorrect even though it isn't. And this might look correct even though it isn't. So when you are the set designer or the props designer or the costume designer, or an aesthetic marshal or something like that, what do you do? Because if the whole point is that you're trying to draw people into a new world, unfortunately, at the moment, this does a better job of conveying that they're in a different time period than this might. You might have some people, in fact, I might have been one of those people at a certain point in my life when I was younger or more hot-headed or something like that, where I might have looked at that and go, oh, those idiots? They don't know what they're doing, that's incorrect. And then I later would have realized that that was right, and I would have felt really dumb, that I would have been the idiot. I'm always an idiot, what am I talking about? Back on topic, this is an important question for me, and one that I want to explore. One that I want to hear very long comments from you in the comment section below. And I want to know what you think. What role does visual media, or literary media, I suppose, books, movies, TVs, games, fairs, stuff like that. What role does that play in educating people on history? How much of that historical accuracy should work its way into the genre? The trend I've been seeing is that things are getting more historical accurate. The tendency is more towards realism with with movies like The Outlaw King and The King. There's still anachronisms in there, but they're attempting to be more accurate than, say, Robin Hood was with Kevin Costner. Games like Kingdom Come Deliverance, with painstakingly done historical research. That seems to be the way that things are going. And I personally, as an actor, want to make things as historical. If the piece is meant to be historical, I want it to be as historically accurate as possible. I want that realism. And even when things are meant to be fantasy, I want them grounded in realism. Even if we're pulling from different time periods, I at least want them to be plausible. And I want to live as closely to our ancestors as I can so that my performance and my interpretation as an actor can be authentic. But when to the modern eye, something like this might look inauthentic, whereas something like this might look authentic, I can understand why a designer for a movie or a TV show or someone who's just reenacted might choose this Viking chair over something that's actually historically accurate because it conveys the time period that they're trying to convey. It's very different when you're performing for someone than if you're just doing something for yourself for fun. People expect to see certain things nowadays, unfortunately. And that is partly due to media, which is why asking what role media should play in historical education, I think, is very important. I mean, given enough repetition, eventually people would start seeing this as being historically accurate over this. Sort of the same way that people have been trained to think of this as being more historically accurate than this, or these, you know? So as an actor, I haven't quite decided how I fit into that yet. And I've had to make, just working at the fair, like the purpose of the fair isn't to be historically accurate. There are reenactment groups that are at the fair and they are as historically accurate as they can be at the current time. I mean, at a certain point, no one's ever actually historically accurate, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. It's a really interesting question, and I'm not a set designer or a costume designer or really a designer at all for that matter. And how do you convey that information and teach someone in a movie that is not a documentary? I suppose you'd have to work it into the script somehow, that this is correct without being preachy about it. So, my fellow adventurers, thank you for joining me for today's Candleside Chat. I know we covered a couple of tangential topics to what actually is just a simple historical correction about early medieval 11th century chairs. But please do let me know what you think. We are the target audience for a lot of these movies, and I feel like we have the real ability to make our voices heard, and as a member of the industry, I want to know what it is that people want to see and how they think it should be shown to them. So please let me know what you think down in the comments. If you liked the video, please like the video. I will see you again next week with whatever it is that I decide to do next. And in the meantime, I'd like to wish you good luck on your adventures. Wax went everywhere.